Some moments are accidents, a slip of the hand, a misplaced word. But some moments are choices. At a bustling gate in Los Angeles International Airport, a gate agent makes a choice. Fueled by a quiet, simmering rage, she takes a passenger's passport and a lighter, and in one shocking act of malice sets a young woman's identity ablaze in front of a stunned crowd. What she doesn't know, what she couldn't possibly fathom, is that the calm, unassuming black woman watching her future turn to ash is not just another traveler. She is Dr. Kendra Roberts, the Chief Inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, and she has just witnessed a failure so profound it will bring an entire airline to its knees. The air in LAX's Terminal 4 was a familiar cocktail of recycled oxygen, Cinnabon sweetness, and the faint, anxious sweat of 1,000 travelers. It was a symphony of chaos, Dr. Kendra Roberts knew well a place where the grand ballet of modern aviation met the messy reality of the human condition. Today, she was just a part of the crowd, intentionally anonymous, dressed in comfortable grey joggers, a simple black hoodie from her alma mater MIT, and worn-in sneakers. She looked more like a graduate student than the single most powerful figure in aviation oversight. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and behind her non-prescription glasses, her eyes the color of dark honey missed nothing. This was the point. For her undercover inspector initiative to work, she had to experience the system as a regular passenger. She needed to see the cracks not from a boardroom 30,000 feet above the problem, but from Gate 42B, waiting for a delayed transcontinental air flight to Atlanta. The gate agent, a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Maureen, was already a storm cloud on the horizon. Kendra had been observing her for 20 minutes. She'd watched Maureen snap at an elderly man who asked for clarification on the boarding zones, rolling her eyes with theatrical disdain. She'd seen her mock a young mother struggling with a stroller saying loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some people should just drive." Maureen Davis wielded her small kingdom of chipped countertops and blinking computer screens with the tyranny of a forgotten monarch. Kendra's boarding group 3 was finally called. She approached the podium phone in one hand, with her boarding pass displayed passport in the other. She preferred using the physical document for ID. It was a habit from years of international travel. Next, Maureen barked, not looking up from her screen. Kendra stepped forward. "Good morning," she said, her voice pleasant and even. Maureen's eyes flicked up, taking in Kendra's casual attire, her dark skin, her youth. A subtle shift occurred in her posture, a straightening of the spine, a tightening of the lips. It was a micro-expression Kendra had seen 1,000 times before. It was the look of someone making a calculation, a judgment based on a whole library of prejudices. Boarding pass, Maureen demanded, her hand outstretched, palm up. Kendra held out her phone. Maureen snatched it, her fingers brushing Kendra's with a cold, dismissive touch. She scanned the pass, then her eyes narrowed. "This seat, 12A. It's a preferred exit row seat." Maureen stated, her tone accusatory, as if Kendra had stolen it. "Yes, I know. I selected it when I booked the flight," Kendra replied calmly. "These seats are reserved for our frequent flyers, and those who pay the upgrade fee." Maureen continued, her voice rising slightly, drawing the attention of the people behind Kendra in line. "I don't see a status level on your account. I paid the fee. It should be on the reservation record," Kendra explained, keeping her voice steady. "The first crack in the system. An employee questioning a paid-for service, casting doubt on the customer in a public forum." She made a mental note. Maureen tapped aggressively at her keyboard. I'm not seeing it. You'll have to move to a standard economy seat. I have a middle seat in the back, 34B. I can assure you I paid for it," Kendra said, a little more firmly this time. "Perhaps you could check again. My receipt is in my email if you need to see it." Maureen let out a short, derisive laugh. "Honey, I don't have time to look at your emails. The computer says you didn't pay." "So you didn't pay. Now are you going to take the new seat, or are you going to hold up the entire flight?" The line behind Kendra was growing restless. A man in a suit sighed impatiently. The young mother from earlier was now trying to soothe a crying baby. This was a classic pressure tactic. Use the impatience of the crowd to force compliance. "I would like to sit in the seat I paid for, Kendra," said her voice, dropping to a low, resolute calm that seemed to unnerve Maureen more than shouting would have. "I'm not holding up the line. Your system's failure to reflect a paid transaction is. If you're unable to resolve it, I'm happy to wait for a supervisor." The word supervisor was a lit match. Maureen's face flushed a blotchy red. It was a challenge to her authority in her little kingdom. "There's no need for a supervisor," she spat. "But before we go any further, I'm going to need to see your identification. And I mean proper identification." Her eyes landed on the dark blue passport in Kendra's hand. "Let me see that passport." Kendra handed it over. Maureen snatched it from her grasp, her movements jerky and filled with rage. She opened the document with a snap, her eyes scanning the photo, then flicking up to Kendra's face, then back down. She did this 3 times, a deliberate act of theatrical suspicion. Kendra A. Roberts. She read aloud, mispronouncing the first name as Kendra, with a mocking emphasis. Date of birth. You look a little young to be traveling alone on a full fare ticket, don't you? I'm 34 years old, Kendra said, her patience wearing microscopically thin. I'm old enough to have a doctorate, let alone buy a plane ticket. Maureen's eyes narrowed into slits. A doctorate, huh? In what basket weaving? She ran a thumb over the passport photo, a gesture of profound disrespect. This photo doesn't look much like you. The skin tone is off. A collective intake of breath came from the people nearby. The man in the suit now looked uncomfortable. A college-aged boy, a few people back, subtly lifted his phone, its screen facing the counter. Kendra felt a cold stillness settle over her. This had moved past poor customer service. It had crossed a line into something far more toxic. It's a government-issued document, and it is perfectly valid, Kendra stated. Her heart was beating a steady rhythmic drum against her ribs. She was no longer just a passenger. She was an inspector, and this was now an active investigation. Maureen smirked, a cruel, knowing twisting of her lips. She tapped the passport on the counter, a clear look of contempt on her face. Beside her keyboard was a large, steaming cup of coffee from the terminal cafe. In one fluid, seemingly careless motion, she swung her arm out, knocking the cup over. Hot, dark liquid flooded across the counter, washing directly over Kendra's open passport. "Oh my," Maureen exclaimed with a voice dripping in fake sincerity. "Clumsy me." She looked directly at Kendra, a glint of malicious triumph in her eyes. The passport, the key to her identity, her ability to travel was now soaked in scalding, bitter coffee. The pages were warped, the ink of the stamps beginning to blur. And Maureen Davis just stood there, smiling. The coffee spread in a dark, sticky tide across the Formica countertop. It saturated the thick official paper of Kendra's passport, the heat causing the pages to curl inward like a dying leaf. The crisp blue cover was now stained a dirty brown. For a moment, the only sound was the drip, drip, drip of coffee onto the floor and the stunned silence of the onlookers. Kendra did not gasp. She did not yell. She simply looked down at the ruined document, then back up at Maureen, her expression an unreadable mask of calm. This unnerving lack of reaction seemed to enrage Maureen more than any outburst could have. She had expected tears, pleading, or anger. She had wanted a scene. The quiet dignity Kendra projected was a defiance she couldn't tolerate. "Well, look at that," Maureen said, her voice oozing with false sympathy. "That's a real shame. A damaged passport is a void passport. You can't travel on this. Federal regulations." She spoke the last two words with a smug finality, as if she were the one who wrote them. "It wasn't damaged until you spilled your coffee on it," Kendra replied, her voice dangerously level. "It was an accident." Maureen snapped her charade of politeness, vanishing. "Accidents happen, especially when my workspace is cluttered." She gestured vaguely at Kendra's phone and the ruined passport, implying they were the clutter. The student with the phone, a young man named Leo, now had it held more openly, the red dot of the recording light clearly visible. Maureen either didn't notice or didn't care. "You'll have to go to the passport agency and get a new one." Maureen continued, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Maybe next time you'll be more careful with your things." She was trying to flip the script to make this Kendra's fault. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, and Kendra recognized it immediately. She had seen this behavior documented in thousands of passenger complaints. The employee who creates a problem then blames the customer for the consequences. "I'm going to need your full name and your employee number," Kendra said, her tone shifting from that of a passenger to one of an official making a record. Maureen's smirk faltered. "For what? For the report I'll be filing. With Transcontinental, the TSA, and the Department of Transportation." This list of acronyms, spoken with such authority, gave Maureen a moment's pause. But her arrogance quickly reasserted itself. She was untouchable. She had a union. She'd been doing this for 15 years. She'd seen complainers like this come and go. "It's Maureen Davis, employee number 73445. She rattled off, as if daring Kendra to use it. "And my report will say that the passenger became belligerent over a seat assignment, and that in the ensuing confusion, a beverage was accidentally spilled. It will be my word against yours." She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "And who do you think they're going to believe, a loyal 15-year employee or you?" She gestured dismissively at Kendra's simple attire. Kendra refused to take the bait. She held Maureen's gaze. "I think the truth will be quite clear." Frustrated by Kendra's refusal to break, Maureen's rage bubbled over. She was losing control of the situation, of the narrative. She needed to re-establish her dominance, to inflict one final, undeniable act of humiliation. Her eyes darted around the counter. She saw the warped, dripping passport. An idea, ugly and impulsive, sparked in her mind. "You know, heat can sometimes fix water damage," Maureen said, a strange, manic energy in her voice. "Dries it right out." Before anyone could process what she meant, she reached under the counter, and her hand came back up, holding a small, disposable cigarette lighter. A gasp rippled through the line of waiting passengers. "What are you doing?" the man in the suit, Gary demanded, finally finding his voice. Maureen ignored him. She flicked the wheel. A small orange flame sprang to life, dancing in the air-conditioned breeze of the terminal. "Maureen, do not do that," Kendra commanded. Her voice was sharp, absolute. It was the voice of a person used to giving orders and having them followed without question. It was the voice of the chief FAA inspector. But Maureen was too far gone. She was caught in the grip of her own venomous pride. With a look of pure, unadulterated malice directed at Kendra, she lowered the flame toward the corner of the passport's cover page. "Just trying to help," she sneered. The flame touched the coffee-soaked paper. For a second, it sizzled. Then the corner blackened, curled and caught. A tiny, hungry orange flame began to eat away at the dark blue document. It was a federal crime being committed in plain sight under the harsh fluorescent lights of Gate 42B. The smell of burning paper and chemicals filled the air. Leo the student audibly gasped, but kept his phone steady, zooming in on the flame. The mother with the baby pulled her child closer, her face a mask of horror. Maureen held the burning passport for a moment, a high priestess making a profane sacrifice on the altar of her own bitterness. The fire reflected in her wide, crazed eyes. This was her victory. This was her power. Kendra watched her face, etched with a grim, cold fury. She watched her identity, her symbol of citizenship, a document that had taken her to 37 countries in the service of aviation safety, being casually and illegally destroyed by a woman whose salary was paid by the very system Kendra was sworn to protect. Finally, as if realizing what she had done, Maureen yelped and dropped the smoldering booklet onto the counter. She tried to bat the small flame out with her hand, succeeding only in smearing black soot across the already ruined cover. The passport lay there, a casualty of a war Kendra hadn't even known she was fighting. It was drenched, burned, and utterly destroyed. Maureen looked up, breathing heavily, a wild look in her eyes. She expected to see Kendra defeated, broken. Instead, she saw a woman whose expression had transformed. The passenger was gone. In her place was someone else entirely. The calm had solidified into something harder, something colder. It was the polished calm of absolute, unshakable authority. Maureen Davis, employee number 734255. Kendra said, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of an avalanche. You have no idea what you've just done. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of disbelief. The passengers stood frozen, a silent chorus to the drama that had just unfolded. The acrid smell of burnt paper hung in the air like a guilty secret. Maureen Davis, her hand smudged with soot, stared at the smouldering passport, the adrenaline of her rage beginning to curdle into a sick, cold dread. She had gone too far. She knew it, but her pride wouldn't let her admit it. Now look what happened, Maureen stammered, falling back on her ingrained habit of deflecting blame. This is what happens when you cause a commotion. Security, she yelled, her voice cracking with a mixture of panic and bravado. I need security at Gate 42B. A belligerent passenger has destroyed her own travel document. It was a stunningly audacious lie. But Kendra didn't even flinch. She simply turned her head slightly and spoke to the student Leo, who was still filming. Young man, she said, her voice clear and carrying. Did you get all of that? Leo, looking pale but resolute, nodded dumbly. Yes, ma'am. Everything. Excellent. Do not delete that video. It is now evidence in a federal investigation. The term federal investigation hung in the air, electric and terrifying. Maureen's face went white. 2 airport security officers, looking bored and weary, ambled up to the gate. What's the problem here? The older of the 2 officers asked, his hand resting on his belt. This woman, Maureen said, pointing a trembling finger at Kendra, was causing a disturbance. She refused a lawful seat change, and then she set her passport on fire. She's unstable. Kendra turned to face the officer. She ignored Maureen completely, as if the gate agent had ceased to exist. Officer, this airline employee, Maureen Davis, has just willfully destroyed a United States passport, which is a federal document. The act was witnessed by at least 12 people and is on video. I would like you to detain her. The officer looked from Kendra's calm, authoritative face to Maureen's panicked, blotchy one. He was confused. This didn't look like an unstable passenger. This looked like something else. Ma'am, that's a serious accusation, he began. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, Kendra corrected him gently. Furthermore, I require your supervising manager at this gate immediately. And I need to use a phone. You can't. You can't give orders. Maureen shrieked, her voice hitting a hysterical pitch. Before the security officer could respond, a harried-looking man in a slightly ill-fitting suit rushed toward the gate. "What in God's name is going on here? I got a call about a disturbance." He wore a name tag that identified him as Robert Miller, duty manager. "Rob, thank God," Maureen said, rushing to his side. "This passenger is out of control." She burned her own passport. Robert Miller looked at the scene, the shocked passengers, the security officers, the phone still pointed at the counter, and the calm, collected black woman at the center of it all. His managerial instincts took over. His job was to de-escalate, to control the narrative, to protect the airline. "Okay, let's everybody just take a breath," Miller said in a placating tone. "Ma'am," he said to Kendra, "why don't you step aside with me, and we can sort this out quietly?" "There is nothing to sort out, Mr. Miller," Kendra replied, her eyes boring into him. "And nothing about this will be quiet. An employee under your supervision has just committed a felony. Your first action should not be to placate me, but to address the criminal act of your staff." Miller was taken aback by her language. "Felony, that's a strong word. I'm sure it was just an accident that got out of hand. He hadn't seen the incident, and his default setting was to defend his employee." "Mr. Miller, are you the highest-ranking official for Transcontinental Air at this airport?" At this moment, Kendra asked. "I am the duty manager, yes." "Then you have a serious problem. Your employee, Maureen Davis, after first attempting to defraud me of a service I paid for, subjected me to a series of racially motivated questions about my identity, and then deliberately destroyed my passport, first with coffee and then with a lighter." "I did not," Maureen cried. "She's lying, Sir Leo." The student spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. "I have it on video. The whole thing. She called her, honey, questioned her, Ticket said her photo looked off, and then she burned the passport. On purpose." Robert Miller's face paled. Video. The word every corporate manager dreads. His eyes darted from Leo's phone to Maureen's guilty face, and the carefully constructed wall of corporate denial began to crumble. "Okay," Miller said, his tone shifting from placating to panicked. "Okay, let's go to the office." "No," Kendra said, her voice ringing with an authority that rooted him to the spot. "We will handle this right here. Mr. Miller, I need your phone. Now." It was not a request. Her tone was so absolute, so commanding, that the manager found himself reaching into his jacket pocket and handing his personal cell phone over to this woman in a hoodie and joggers. He did it without thinking, a reflex to a level of command he hadn't encountered since his time in the military. Kendra took the phone. She swiped it open and dialed a number from memory. The entire gate area was now silent, watching this bizarre transfer of power. Kendra turned slightly away, affording herself a small measure of privacy, but her voice was still audible. "David, it's Kendra. I'm at LAX Terminal 4. Gate 42B. We have a situation." There was a pause as she listened. Maureen watched her face, a mess of confusion and fear. "Who was David? It's a code 1, Kendra said into the phone, and Robert Miller felt a jolt of ice water shoot through his veins. Code 1 was an internal designation for a catastrophic failure in safety or security protocols. It was a term reserved for bomb threats and hijackings. No breach of the cockpit. It's a personnel failure, a complete and utter breakdown of protocol conduct and federal law at the passenger interface level." She paused again, listening. "Yes. Deliberate destruction of a federal document by the gate agent, unprovoked." She listened for another moment, her eyes sweeping over the scene. Her gaze rested on the Transcontinental Air logo on the wall behind the desk. "David, I want you to invoke Section 110.5 of the Aviation Security Act, effective immediately. I want a complete ground stop on all transcontinental air flights nationwide." Robert Miller's jaw dropped. He swayed on his feet. A nationwide ground stop, that was impossible. No one could order that. No one except... Yes, all of them. Kendra continued into the phone, her voice like ice. Every single flight, from JFK to SFO, ground the entire fleet. I am officially declaring this airline's ground operations a systemic security risk until I can personally verify their fitness to operate. No, I don't care about the cost. Consider it the price of doing business. She listened one last time. He's here. The duty manager. Name is Robert Miller. I'll handle it from this end. Just get it done. She ended the call and handed the phone back to a ghostly white Robert Miller, who took it with a trembling hand. Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Kendra reached into the small backpack she wore. She pulled out a slim black leather wallet. She flipped it open. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was not a driver's license, but a gold-embossed credential featuring a holographic eagle. "My name," she said, her voice now resonating with the full weight of her office, "is Dr. Kendra Roberts. I am the Chief Inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, and your airline, Mr. Miller, is now under my direct and personal investigation." Maureen Davis made a small, choking sound. The world tilted on its axis. The woman she had tormented, the woman in the joggers she had dismissed as a nobody, was the highest authority in the room, in the entire industry, and she had just burned her passport, in front of witnesses, on camera. The quiet of the gate was suddenly broken by the frantic squawking of Miller's radio. Then another. Then a nearby screen showing departures flickered. Next to every flight listed under transcontinental air, the status changed from on time or delayed to a single ominous word in bold red letters, grounded. The moment the word grounded populated the departure screens, a new kind of chaos erupted. It wasn't the chaos of a single gate. It was the digital shockwave of a multi-billion-dollar corporation being brought to a screeching halt. Phones began ringing all across the terminal. Alarms and alerts chirped from the pockets of every pilot flight attendant and airline employee within earshot. Robert Miller stared at the board, his face ashen, as if he were watching his own career obituary being written in real time. Maureen Davis had collapsed onto her stool behind the counter. The color had drained from her face, replaced by a waxy, sickly pallor. Her mind was a frantic scramble of denial and terror. This couldn't be happening. It was a bluff, a nightmare. But the red letters on the screen, the cacophony of alerts, the sheer crushing authority radiating from Dr. Roberts, it was all terrifyingly real. Mr. Miller, Kendra, said, her voice cutting through the rising tide of panic. "The two security officers behind you, they are no longer here for me. They are here for Miss Davis. You will instruct them to escort her to a secure office and ensure she does not leave. She is not to touch a computer, a phone, or communicate with anyone until federal agents arrive. Do you understand?" Miller, jolted out of his stupor, could only nod. He turned to the officers. "You heard her. Take her to my office. Now." The officers, their expressions now grim and serious, stepped behind the counter. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the older one said. Maureen looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "No. Please. It was a mistake. I was having a bad day. I didn't mean it." She pleaded, her voice a pathetic whimper. "You meant every second of it." Maureen Kendra said, her voice devoid of any pity. "You enjoyed it. The only thing you regret is who I am, not what you did." As the officers gently but firmly took Maureen by the arms and led her away, a sobbing, broken mess, Kendra turned her attention back to Miller. Mr. Miller, your next call will be to your airline's Vice President of North American Operations. Her name is Patricia Walsh. You will inform her that I expect her here at this airport within 90 minutes. If she has to charter a jet, I suggest she do it. You will also tell her to bring legal counsel and the entirety of your company's training and hiring protocol documents for the last 5 years. 90 minutes, she's in San Francisco, Miller stammered. Then she'd better hurry, Kendra replied without a flicker of sympathy. She then looked at Leo, the student who had become the unwitting documentarian of the entire event. Young man, what is your name, Leo? Leo Barnes. Leo, I want to commend you for your presence of mind. That video is crucial. I need you to stay here. An agent from the Inspector General's office will be here shortly to take your official statement and secure a copy of that file. We will, of course, compensate you for your flight and any inconvenience. Leo just nodded, looking overwhelmed, but also understanding the gravity of his role. Within 20 minutes, the gate had transformed from a simple boarding area into a federal command post. 2 stern-faced men in dark suits, FAA agents, had arrived. They conferred quietly with Dr. Roberts, who gave them a series of clipped, precise instructions. One agent began interviewing the other passengers who had witnessed the event, including Gary the businessman and the young mother Laura, who were all too willing to recount what they had seen. The other agent was dispatched to Miller's office to begin the formal questioning of Maureen Davis. The financial bleeding for transcontinental air had begun. Every minute the fleet was grounded. Millions of dollars were hemorrhaging in fuel costs for idling planes, crew salaries, airport fees, and the logistical nightmare of rerouting tens of thousands of passengers. The stock market, notoriously sensitive to such disruptions, would be next. News travels fast, and unexplained nationwide ground stop were words that sent investors running for the exits. Less than an hour later, a flustered and visibly panicked Patricia Walsh, the VP of Operations, came sprinting down the terminal, followed by a lawyer clutching a briefcase. She was a formidable woman in a tailored suit, but today her hair was slightly askew, and her face was pale with anxiety. She saw Kendra standing calmly by the window, watching a grounded 737 sit impotently on the tarmac. Dr. Roberts Walsh asked, her voice strained. Kendra turned slowly. Ms. Walsh, thank you for coming so promptly. What is going on? Walsh demanded, though her tone lacked any real force. A nationwide ground stop for a gate agent issue. This is unprecedented. It's a multi-million-dollar overreaction. Kendra's expression hardened. Overreaction. Ms. Walsh, what I witnessed here today was not a gate agent issue. It was a symptom of a deep systemic sickness in your corporate culture. I saw an employee who felt so empowered by her uniform and so emboldened by, I can only assume, a lack of consequences, that she felt she had the right to publicly harass a passenger based on her race and appearance. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. Then she escalated. She committed fraud by denying a paid service, lied to her superior, and then, in a fit of what I can only describe as sociopathic rage, she committed a federal crime. She took a lighter to a U.S. passport. She set a symbol of my citizenship on fire. In my face. Walsh flinched as if struck. This wasn't an isolated incident, was it? Ms. Walsh Kendra continued, her voice relentless. My office has been flagging transcontinental for the past 18 months. You have the highest rate of passenger complaints per capita of any major U.S. carrier. Allegations of discrimination, mishandled baggage, and employee misconduct are up 300%. We've sent letters, we've requested meetings. Your company sent back placating form letters written by this gentleman here. She gestured to the lawyer, promising internal reviews and renewed commitment to excellence. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Well, your internal reviews have failed. So now you get an external one, conducted by me. Your fleet will remain grounded until I have personally reviewed your hiring practices, your anti-discrimination training, your employee disciplinary records, and your protocols for customer service. Every single page. She turned to look out the window again. I saw a crack in the system today, Ms. Walsh, and I'm grounding your airline because I need to find out if it's a crack in the wall or a crack in the entire foundation. Judging by what happened here, I suspect I know the answer. Now shall we find a conference room? You have a lot of reading material for me. Patricia Walsh looked at the grounded planes, at the red letters on the departure board, and at the unyielding woman before her. The full catastrophic scale of what Maureen Davis had done was finally dawning on her. This wasn't about one employee's bad day. This was a corporate reckoning. The conference room they procured was one of the airport's sterile, windowless boxes designed for tense negotiations and bad news. For the next 8 hours, it became Dr. Kendra Roberts's surgical theatre, and Transcontinental Air was the patient laid out on the table, its corporate body about to be dissected without anesthetic. Patricia Walsh and her lawyer, a man named Henderson, sat on one side of the long table. Heaps of binders and stacks of printouts were piled before them, the documents Kendra had demanded. On the other side sat Kendra, flanked by her 2 lead agents. Her ruined passport lay in a sealed evidence bag in the center of the table, a silent, damning centerpiece. Kendra's methodology was brutal in its efficiency. She didn't start with policy. She started with people. Pull Maureen Davis's complete employee file, she commanded. A junior executive patched in via video call from Transcontinental's Dallas headquarters scrambled to comply. The file appeared on the large screen at the end of the room. Kendra began to read her eyes, scanning the data with unnerving speed. 15 years of service, Kendra noted aloud, and in that time, 12 formal passenger complaints filed against her, 4 for rude behavior, 3 alleging discriminatory language, 2 for mishandling of seating, and 3 for aggressive conduct. What was the resolution on these, Ms. Walsh? Walsh looked at the file, her face tight. They were handled internally. A verbal warning here, a mandatory online refresher course there. An online refresher course. Kendra repeated the words, dripping with contempt. So for a dozen separate incidents over a decade, culminating in 3 separate complaints alleging racism just in the last 2 years, your company's solution was to have her click through a PowerPoint presentation. Our union rules have strict protocols for disciplinary action, Henderson, the lawyer, interjected smoothly. Your union rules do not supersede federal law. Mr. Henderson. Kendra shot back without looking at him. Nor do they excuse a pattern of behavior that creates a hostile and potentially dangerous environment for the traveling public. You didn't solve a problem. You enabled it. You contained it. You kept putting this woman a known risk in a public-facing, high-stress position. Why Walsh was silent. The truth was unpalatable. It was easier and cheaper to keep a problematic veteran employee than to go through the lengthy and costly process of firing her. Let's move on. Kendra set a clear sign that the point had been made and logged. I want to see your anti-bias and de-escalation training modules. All of them. For the next 2 hours, they watched the corporate training videos. They were slickly produced, full of smiling actors of diverse backgrounds, spouting empty platitudes about customer synergy and valuing diversity. The de-escalation module consisted of a 5-minute cartoon about identifying an angry passenger and offering them a voucher. Kendra watched it all with a stony expression. When it was over, she turned to Walsh. "That's it," she asked. "That is the full extent of the training you provide your employees to handle complex human interactions in a high-pressure environment." "It's the industry standard," Walsh offered weakly. "Then the industry standard is a failure," Kendra declared. "This isn't training. It's a liability shield. It's a cheap digital checkbox that allows your legal department to say, 'We did something,' when an incident occurs. There's no substance here, no role-playing, no discussions of implicit bias, no strategies for an employee to manage their own stress and anger. You're not training your people. You're just inoculating your company." She gestured toward the evidence bag. What happened out there wasn't a failure of training. It was the predictable outcome of a complete lack of it. The dissection continued, layer by bloody layer. Kendra demanded records of every complaint filed against the airline in the last 24 months. As her agents parsed the data, a disturbing picture emerged. The complaints weren't just high in number, they were specific in nature. A disproportionate number came from women, people of color, and travelers with disabilities. There were dozens of stories just like hers, minus the passport-burning passengers of color, being second-guessed about their priority, boarding asked for extra identification, or spoken to in condescending tones. "This isn't about one bad employee, Miss Walsh," Kendra said, her voice low and intense. "Maureen Davis isn't an anomaly. She's the apex predator in an ecosystem you created. An ecosystem where the customer is an inconvenience and disrespect is tolerated as long as the planes leave on time." By hour 5, the financial report started to come in. The stock had plunged 18% in after-hours trading on the news of the FAA action. The direct cost of the ground stop was approaching $50 million, and it was climbing with every passing minute. News outlets had picked up the story, and though the details were scant, the video from Leo Barnes's phone had somehow been leaked to a major news network. The clip of Maureen Davis, her face twisted in a sneer as she held a lighter to a US passport, was playing on a loop on cable news. The public relations fallout was going to be catastrophic. Finally, Kendra leaned back in her chair. The room was thick with the stench of corporate failure. "Here is what is going to happen," she said, and everyone in the room sat ramrod straight. 1. The ground stop will be lifted in stages beginning in 4 hours, but Transcontinental Air will be operating on a probationary basis for the next 12 months under the direct supervision of my office. 2. You will fire Maureen Davis effective immediately, and you will issue a public statement that Transcontinental is cooperating fully with the Department of Justice in their criminal investigation against her for the destruction of a federal document and other pending charges. 3. You will terminate Robert Miller for gross negligence in his management duties. His first instinct was to protect a criminal employee and silence a victim. He is unfit for airport management. 4. You, Ms. Walsh, will personally oversee the complete overhaul of your customer-facing employee training programs. You will hire an independent FAA-approved firm to design a new curriculum focused on intensive in-person training on implicit bias de-escalation and federal regulations regarding passenger rights. This will be implemented company-wide within 6 months. And 5, she said, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto Walsh's. Transcontinental Air will pay a fine. Given the scope of the negligence, the pattern of complaints, and the flagrant criminality I witnessed today, the FAA is levying a civil penalty of $150 million. Henderson. The lawyer gasped. $150 million. That's outrageous. We'll fight that. Kendra smiled, a cold, sharp thing. Go ahead. Take us to court. The discovery process will be very public. We can start with Leo Barnes's video and the testimony of a dozen witnesses, and then we can move on to the 2,000 formal complaints you've ignored over the last 2 years. Or you can sign the consent decree, pay the fine, fix your broken company, and consider this the most expensive but most important lesson you have ever learned. She stood up, the meeting clearly over. Your airline put a fire starter and a bigot in a position of power and looked the other way for years. Today she finally burned something you couldn't hide. The fire is out now, Miss Walsh, but your company is going to be cleaning up the smoke damage for a very long time. The days and weeks that followed the incident at LAX were a brutal education in cause and effect for everyone involved. For Dr. Kendra Roberts, it was a grim validation of her mission. For Transcontinental Air and its employees, it was a lesson in karma, delivered with the force of a Category 5 hurricane. Maureen Davis learned the hardest lesson of all. Fired in disgrace, she was arrested by federal marshals the very next day. The video of her burning the passport had gone viral, making her the face of corporate malevolence overnight. Her name, Maureen Davis, became a trending topic, a meme, a shorthand for racist, power-tripping employees everywhere. She was charged with the destruction of a U.S. passport, a felony carrying a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. Additional charges of intimidation of a federal officer, which Kendra was even undercover, were also being considered. Her union, which she had believed to be an impenetrable shield, dropped her case immediately. The evidence was too public, too damning. No one wanted to be associated with her. She was forced to hire a public defender who advised her to plead guilty and hope for mercy. In a pre-trial hearing, the judge, citing the unprovoked and malicious nature of the act, denied bail. Maureen Davis, who had started her day complaining about a delayed flight, was now sitting in a federal detention center, stripped of her uniform, her pride, and her freedom. Her 15 years of service had ended not with a pension, but with a prison jumpsuit. The kingdom she ruled from behind a gate counter was now a 6 by 9 foot cell. Robert Miller, the duty manager, was terminated as Kendra had demanded. His career in aviation, built over 2 decades, was over. He was seen as incompetent at best and complicit at worst. No other airline would hire him. He lost his job, his reputation, and the respect of his peers. His failure was not in spilling the coffee or lighting the match, but in his instinct to protect the perpetrator over the victim, to value the corporation over the law. He had chosen the wrong side, and the consequences were absolute. For Transcontinental Air, the public humiliation was just the beginning. The $150 million fine was a painful but survivable blow to their balance sheet. The real damage was to their brand. The story was everywhere: CNN, Fox News, BBC, The New York Times. The phrase, "Gate Agent Burns Passport," was seared into the public consciousness. Boycotts were organized, corporate accounts were cancelled. Their stock, after the initial plunge, continued to languish as traveler confidence evaporated. Patricia Walsh, true to Kendra's word, was forced to personally oversee the corporate restructuring. Her life became a living nightmare of emergency board meetings, hostile press conferences, and grueling sessions with the FAA-appointed consultants who were now essentially running her department. She had to issue a public on-camera apology, reading from a script that had been personally vetted by Kendra's office. The apology rang hollow, but the image of the humbled executive was a powerful symbol of the airline's fall from grace. But Kendra's actions went far beyond simple punishment. She used the full power of her office to enact meaningful systemic change. The Transcontinental Incident, as it came to be known, became her case study. She convened a national summit with the heads of every major U.S. airline. In a packed auditorium in Washington, D.C., she stood at a podium, the image of the burning passport projected on a giant screen behind her. For years, she began, her voice echoing through the hall, you have viewed customer service complaints as a public relations problem to be managed. You have treated fines for misconduct as a simple cost of doing business. You have allowed toxic employees to fester in your ranks because it was easier than confronting them. You have created a culture where the passenger is often seen as the enemy. She clicked a button, and Leo's video played on the screen, silent but devastating. The entire room of powerful CEOs watched Maureen Davis's sneer, saw the flicker of the lighter, the curl of the flame. This is the result, Kendra said, as the video ended. This is what happens when you substitute genuine training for liability waivers. This is what happens when you ignore 1,000 whispers of complaint until they become a roar of open criminality. This is not just a transcontinental problem. This is an industry problem. She then laid out the Passenger's Bill of Rights, a new set of sweeping FAA regulations born directly from the ashes of her passport. It mandated standardized in-person de-escalation and bias training for all public-facing airline staff. It established a new streamlined federal system for filing and tracking passenger complaints with severe escalating fines for airlines that showed a pattern of unresolved issues. It created clear, non-negotiable consequences for employees found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior. The airlines protested, of course. They complained about the cost, the overreach, the logistical difficulties. But they had no leverage. The video of Maureen Davis had stripped them of all moral high ground. The public was on Kendra's side. Congress was on her side. They had no choice but to comply. The hardest karma wasn't just that Maureen Davis went to jail or that Robert Miller lost his job. It wasn't even the $150 million fine. The hardest karma was that Maureen's single hateful act gave Kendra Roberts the political capital and the perfect, undeniable Exhibit A to force an entire industry to change, to finally hold them accountable in a way that years of complaints and lawsuits never could. Maureen, in her attempt to feel powerful by destroying one woman's identity, had inadvertently handed that same woman the power to reshape the entire American aviation landscape. 6 months later, Dr. Kendra Roberts sat in her office in Washington, D.C. The view from her window looked out over the intricate dance of planes taking off and landing at Reagan National Airport. Each one of those aircraft, regardless of the airline, painted on its tail, was now operating under the new regulations she had authored. The Roberts regulations. The media had dubbed them. On her desk, nestled next to a model of the SR-71 Blackbird, was a new passport, crisp clean and untouched by coffee or fire. It was a replacement, but also a reminder. The fallout from the LAX incident had settled, but its impact continued to ripple outward. Maureen Davis had been sentenced. After a tearful, rambling apology in court, she was given 4 years in a federal correctional facility. The judge had been unsparing in his remarks, calling her actions an assault not just on an individual, but on the principles of public trust and decency. Her life was irrevocably ruined, a cautionary tale whispered in airline break rooms across the country. Transcontinental Air was still reeling. They had avoided bankruptcy, but they were a shadow of their former selves. They had spent hundreds of millions on the fine, the mandatory retraining, and a massive advertising campaign to rebuild their image. Their new commercials were full of somber-looking employees talking about respect and listening. It was a long, painful, and expensive road back to credibility. Patricia Walsh had been quietly moved to a different division, her career permanently stalled. For Kendra, the incident had changed things as well. Her undercover inspector program was now legendary within the FAA. Her public profile had skyrocketed. She was hailed as a hero, a champion of passenger rights. She had been invited to speak at conferences and congressional hearings, but she felt no sense of triumph. When she looked at her new passport, she didn't feel victory. She felt a profound sense of weariness. She remembered the look in Maureen's eyes, that empty, bitter rage. She knew that Maureen was not some unique monster, but a product of a system that rewarded apathy and festered resentment. Firing Maureen had been necessary. Fining the airline had been just. But it didn't fix the underlying ugliness that had fueled the woman's actions. A package had arrived for her that morning. It was from Leo Barnes, the student from the airport. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Dr. Roberts, I just wanted to thank you. I used the compensation money you sent to help with my tuition this semester. But mostly, I wanted to thank you for what you did. I've seen people like that gate agent my whole life. People who punch down because they feel small. I never thought anyone could or would do anything about it. You showed me that one person standing their ground with integrity can make a difference. It's a lesson I'll take with me into my own career." Sincerely, Leo Barnes Kendra smiled a genuine, tired smile. That was the victory. It wasn't in the punishment or the new regulations. It was in the possibility that a young man like Leo had seen that the system, for all its flaws, could be forced to bend toward justice. It was in the hope that the next time a passenger felt targeted or disrespected, they would remember this story and know they had a voice. And more importantly, that the next airline employee, feeling that familiar surge of anger or prejudice, would remember Maureen Davis and the catastrophic price of her hatred and choose a different path. The fire at Gate 42B was out. The ashes had been swept away. But from them, something new and stronger had been forged. Kendra picked up her new passport. It was time to book another flight. There were always more cracks in the system to find. The story you just heard is a stark reminder that the biggest confrontations in our lives often happen in the most ordinary places. It's about how quickly a small abuse of power can escalate into a life-altering event. Maureen Davis thought she was just putting a traveler in her place, but she ended up facing the full force of the law and becoming a symbol of corporate failure. Dr. Kendra Roberts didn't seek a fight, but when it came to her, she used her position not for revenge, but for reformation, proving that true power lies in using your authority to fix broken systems and protect the vulnerable. This story shows that karma isn't just a mystical force. It's the logical outcome of our choices, delivered through the integrity and courage of people who refuse to look away. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. And tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed an abuse of power, big or small? What happened? Your stories matter. Let's talk.